Greetings and welcome to our first episode of Monday Matters. My name is Josh Middleton. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Granite Falls School District. And today I am joined by our finance and business director, Marshall Cruz. Marshall, thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Again, I'm Marshall Cruz. I'm the director of business and finance here in Granite Falls, and I've been here for 6.5 years now.
Marshall and I have been visiting lately, and we just felt like, this would be a great opportunity to share with our community a little bit about our school finances. And so we have designed 4 or 5 videos that we want to share with you. And our first one is going to be broadcast and sent out before the holiday break. And then once the new year comes, we will have 4 more videos that we want to share information about our finances and how school finance even works. And so, Marshall, I'm going to just start here with that basic question. It seems like right now there is a lot of media attention and focus on school finances. Why is that? Why are we seeing that more now than ever?
Yeah, Josh, it sure feels like every news broadcast, every edition of the newspaper has something negative about school finance. There's tremendous pressure on school district budgets right now. There's declining enrollment throughout the state. Families are, the cost of living, especially in Western Washington, is extremely high. So families are kind of migrating within the state and out of state to find better places to live and, to find better, higher paying jobs. So there's this migration going throughout the country. It's not just a Washington thing, it's throughout the country. And then there's also, inflation has been pretty high over the last 2 years, and the funding is not keeping up with the levels of inflation. And those two combinations cause an extremely tight job market. So not just in school districts, we're all competing for a limited number of staffing resources, but the regular world of Washington State, the Amazons, the Microsofts, we're all competing for the same workforce. And that's driving up wages and also causing real staffing pressures.
So, Marshall, that's a good sort of global perspective on, why the media is giving so much more attention to school finance lately. We're going to dive a little bit more into our own district. And as we go, if you have questions, we want you to email them to us. Questions, feedback, input, and you can email us at this address below, mmm@gfalls.wednet.edu. And our hope is to get some feedback and questions from our community so that at a later edition of Monday Matters, we can answer those questions for you. So let's talk a little bit about our district, Marshall. So we have 5 schools plus a district office. We have a lot of acreage that we maintain, a lot of buildings, facilities, 2,400 students. We have about 300 employees. Most of them are full-time, but we do have some part-time employees as well. What's the bottom line on our budget? How big is our budget to maintain and provide this education for our students?
That's a pretty deep question. I look at school finance kind of like if you've seen the movie Inception, where it's a dream within a dream within a dream. School finance is like a budget within a budget within a budget. Overall, we have about $46 million in budget to work with, but not all of it is usable for everything we'd want to use it for. There's different buckets.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So 46 million is the aggregate, but now we're going to break them down into the different funds or the different budgets. Is that right?
Right.
And what are they? And I guess, how can they be used? What are their purposes?
So we have 5 buckets. Most school districts, almost every school district has the same 5 buckets. One is our general fund. Our general fund is the bulk of our money that we can spend, and it's about $40 million annually. And we're able to use that just for the day-to-day operations of a school district, salaries for staff, benefits, utilities, fuel for vehicles, supplies, maintenance of our buildings, all those things. And then we have a capital projects fund that has its own budget. And that budget is about $750,000. And that is voter approved. It's funded through a tax levy. And we have voter approval to spend that money on technology improvements for students and staff, and then small capital projects, like if we have a boiler that breaks. I mean, we can't fix big things or do any big additions with that. It's a pretty small budget, but little things like a boiler that goes down, or a HVAC system needs repair, or a small roof, those kind of things can be handled out of that. Debt services is our third category. That is also voter approved, and it's paid for out of a levy, and it could only be used to pay back our voter approved bonds. And we do a bond to like build a school or something like that. Fourth is our ASB fund. Our ASB fund is about $350,000, and it is used to hold money that is raised by students, and it's spent on activities directly for students, and it's managed by an advisor and a student committee. And then finally, we have our transportation vehicle fund. That is built off of a depreciation formula for our vehicles, and it's about $125,000 a year, and it can only be used to buy new buses.
That last sentence, I think, is key, not just restricted to buying buses, but all of these funds do have restrictions, right? Meaning we couldn't use transportation funds, let's say, to buy textbooks. Can you go into that a little bit?
Right. The only thing that is really not restricted is the general fund. We could buy buses from our general fund. We could buy textbooks from our general fund. We could pay back our bond from our general fund. We could do anything we want with the general fund, but all of the other funds are very firmly restricted. So capital project is limited to just the voter approved technology and small capital improvements that we can do for our district. Debt services is specifically restricted to being able to raise enough money to pay off our debt obligations for bonds that we have issued in the past, to pay for when we built the high school 18 years ago, or when we built the stadium and the STEAM building. We finance that out over 10 to 15 years by issuing a bond, and we can pay those back by levying money into our debt services fund. That can only be paid for that, nothing else. ASB is restricted to holding money raised by student activities such as the student store or donations or games, and it has to be spent on student activities, and there's a committee of students that actually manages that. And then finally, as Josh mentioned, the transportation vehicle, it can only be spent to buy new buses. It can't repair used buses. You can't add a tire to a bus. You can't add a radio to a bus. You can't get an oil change. You can only buy a brand new bus with it.
Okay, so that's really important to know. $46 million aggregate broken down into these 5 different budgets, and they all have some level of restriction and not being able to commingle, but with general fund being the most flexible. But of the general fund, that's the largest amount, and that typically is going to our day-to-day operations to educate our students.
Yeah, and in most school districts, we're not a business that makes widgets or anything like that. We educate students. So the bulk of our general fund revenue goes to staffing, paying the salaries and the benefits of our teachers and our support staff. And that's typical of all districts. And if you kind of pool or pull the different districts, it's anywhere between probably 84% and 90% of their general fund budget goes to pay salaries and benefits, because We're in the people business. We have staff to educate students. That's what we do.
And that's going to be the topic of our second episode of Money Monday Matters. And we're going to go do a deeper dive into the general fund. So we'll keep that in mind in terms of how it's used and the percentages of how much go to staffing for our district. So my next question, Marshall, is just some of the misconceptions. You're someone that you attend a lot of events. You are in the buildings. You interact with our board of directors and our staff and our community. What are some of the bigger misconceptions that you hear about school finance?
Well, I think probably the biggest misconception, and this has probably been amplified since the McCleary decision was announced, is that schools are fully funded. We're going to have a future video that talks about how schools are funded, but the obligation, the state feels the obligation to fund school districts is based on a low bar of what the basic requirements for education are. Those don't include athletics. They don't include fully funding transportation. They don't include fully funding special education. They don't include if you want to have more staffing than what the prototypical school model allocates to you. Like a great example of that is it funds 3 paraeducators. Well, we know we need more than 3 paraeducators. And so those things have to come from other sources. So one of the biggest misconceptions is that schools are fully funded, and they aren't. We have to rely on help from our local taxpayers to add things to our district that we feel are basic functions of a school district. I mean, athletics are a basic function. Meals are a basic function. Paying competitive wages to staff, having support staff like student supervisors or crossing guards or nurses, those are not funded at anywhere near the level we need them. So that's probably the biggest misconception.
I think that's a great example. I mean, if we talk about nursing for an example, I think we're funded from the state for less than 1 FTE or full-time equivalent of a nurse. Yet our needs are great, and that is where levy dollars come in to support the basic needs that we have. So clearly, the state isn't fully funding education. We're relying on local taxpayers to support not just some of the enhancements, but also some of the basic needs as well. What's another misconception?
Well, I think that I think another common misconception is that all school districts play by the same rules, that they have the same funding formula, fits every school district, that the amount of money the state provides to school districts is the same no matter where you go. And that's certainly not true. Washington has created a system of haves and have-nots, and we'll dive into regionalization and levy capacity and stuff like that in a future episode. But there are economic and community situations that create a have and have not. Like if you're a population dense city that has a lot of manufacturing and tax base, you have less of a burden on local taxpayers. You have more money for your school district. If you're in a higher cost of living, if you're in what the state considers a higher cost of living area than another district, you get a little more money to pay for your operations, even though you might be 1 mile apart.
I'm going to add one more misconception to you, Marshall, and maybe you can comment on this as well, is that when a district gets into really difficult financial situation, they're going to come and bail you out each and every time. And I think we're seeing even some of our neighbors and throughout the state going into a condition called binding condition, which is basically insolvency, right?
Right. I think.
And so that misconception, the state isn't going to come and save these districts.
No. And, and I guess that is, I mean, it's kind of a deep misconception, but, we're not a grocery store or a private business that if inflation or customers or financial conditions change, we can't raise prices, we can't increase efficiency. We have a funding model that the state provides us money for that doesn't change based on any changing conditions. So if we can't meet our obligations, if we have a budget that means we're going to finish with a negative savings account balance, our expenditures are more than our revenue, we enter this thing called binding condition where we have to come up with an agreement with the state of how we're going to overcome this situation. And if we fail to overcome that situation, then the state can step in and take over operations.
Okay. Well, Marshall, it's been great spending a few minutes talking with you. What I'm really looking forward to is the next 4 episodes where we can go into a deeper dive on a number of these topics. We'll be touching on general fund for sure, and regionalization, and a number of others. We'll even talk the difference between bonds and levies. But we want this to be informative. Again, if you in the community have feedback or questions, please email us at the email address below, and we want to address those with you. And again, thank you for joining, Marshall, and we will see you in January.
I guess just to add to your requesting of feedback, I don't want to assume that I know what everybody wants to know about school districts. So feedback is key, and we want to give people the information that they are looking for and not just assume what they're looking for.
That's a great point. Thank you. All right. Well, community of Granite Falls, we look forward to seeing you in January. Thanks for joining us on our first edition of Money Monday Matters. Take care, everyone.